All right, welcome everyone. My name is Crystal Wickham, and I'm going to be coordinating the speakers tonight. I want to thank everyone for coming. This is the first event in the Sunnyvale Sustainability Speaker Series. And so you are at the inaugural event, and really appreciate you being here. The series is sponsored by City of Sunnyvale as a way to expand community awareness on issues of sustainability. So I want to do a few thank yous. First, I'd like to thank the City Council. There's some council members here tonight. Thank you for coming. But thank the council for their forward thinking and vision in partnering with neighboring cities to form Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Yes. And for sponsoring the speaker series. It does take a lot to put on events like this, and the city staff at Environmental Services Division have done a great job. I especially want to thank Nupur Hiremath for coordinating, and she did the bulk of the planning and the promotion for this event. I also want to thank the entire Sustainability Commission, and especially Steve Zornetzer, who worked with me to suggest goals and speakers and topics for this series. I also wanted to thank Sunnyvale Cool leaders, James Tulea and Barb Fukumoto, for for their ideas, being a sounding board for ideas and suggesting different speakers, and also especially helping get the word out for this event. And certainly not least, I want to thank our speakers, who I will introduce very shortly. So a few items of housekeeping. The restrooms are outside in the lobby on the right and the left. The wonderful refreshments that you've been enjoying need to stay outside since food is not allowed in here. You may have noticed that there's reusable serving items, so we're trying to have a zero waste event for all of these. Please silence your cell phones. Now's a good time. This event is being live broadcast on KSUN TV, and it's also being recorded so we can post it online later. So as you came in, you may have seen the various pieces of paper out there. One of them is a survey. So we really would like your feedback on this event, on the topics, and on the speakers, even suggestions for future speakers. There's also a sheet of resources, heat pump resources that you may find useful. You can take one on the way out if you haven't gotten one. There's also sign-in sheets. If you registered on Eventbrite, you can sign in. There's also a place to sign in if you did not register. All right, so why are we here? City Council chartered and funded a sustainability speaker series to drive community awareness, education, and participation in best practices relating to sustainability. The Sustainability Commission, of which I am a member, took this charter and has selected 3 engaging speakers this year on topics that are relevant and timely. And it's our hope that these events and the speakers will motivate you to take some actions when the time is right for you. So tonight's topic on electrifying homes and businesses is especially relevant now that Silicon Valley Clean Energy has begun procuring 100% greenhouse gas-free electricity for Sunnyvale and 12 neighboring communities. The second event that we have planned in the series is on August 2nd, and we'll be having Rod Dierdon speak on electrifying our transportation system. So you may know the name Dierdon Station. Caltrain is named after him, and he's been a driving force for transportation in the valley. Our third event that we have scheduled is currently planned for August 30th, and we'll have Bea Johnson. She's an author and TED Talk speaker, and she's going to be talking about the zero waste lifestyle. And this is in conjunction with the launch of the Food Cycle program in September, which will provide residents in the city with new bins to collect food scraps for curbside pickup. So let's get started. To set the stage, we have a brief overview of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and then our main speaker, Pierre Delforge. We will reserve time at the end for questions before wrapping up by 8:30. So I'd like to introduce Don Bray, Manager of Account Services at Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Don?
All right, thank you, everyone, and good evening. I'd like to thank and recognize the Sunnyvale Sustainability Commission, because it was the commission working with staff that really kind of gave rise to the whole idea of doing community choice energy here. I think it was in the Climate Action Plan, if I have my facts straight here, that Sunnyvale put together that community choice energy was really identified as a great big needle mover relative to reducing carbon locally. Sunnyvale then teamed up, as you know, or many of you know, with Mountain View, Cupertino, and the County of Santa Clara to begin formation of the Community Choice Agency. But it all started here, so you were being very modest in that. I'm going to take just a few minutes. How many of you are familiar with SVCE? Okay. All right. Then I will maybe take a minute, because I'll just go through a few of the highlights here, the things you absolutely need to know. Again, we were formed by 12 communities, led by the city of Sunnyvale. We are a public joint powers agency. So a lot of people that get the flyers in the mail think we're a solar company or some other commercial concern. We're in fact a joint powers agency. We're a public organization. Our mission is to provide clean electricity at competitive rates and to reduce emissions locally and to provide customers with more choice. And there's plenty of room to do all three of those here locally. And we hope we'll be doing that for you. We launched service in April for 20% of residential customers in the 12 communities that we serve, and for all small and medium businesses. And then in July of this year, we're launching for the remaining 80% of residential customers. So by now, most all of you should have received a notice if you're in the July July enrollment phase, or if you went in April, you've received a lot of notices from us. How does it work? In a traditional utility model, at least in California, an investor-owned utility is responsible for sourcing and delivering energy. In the community choice model, that's split. The new community choice agency becomes responsible for sourcing the electricity. PG&E continues to distribute the electricity. You still get one bill. It comes from PG&E, but any generation-related line item on the bill will reference Silicon Valley Clean Energy. The transmission and distribution and other fees will reference PG&E. This is the team picture from the first board meeting. So Councilman Griffiths in the lower left-hand corner there, representing Sunnyvale. And Tara, you're in this picture as well. Yeah, all right. So good Sunnyvale representation, as you'd expect, as one of the founding agencies. There are a number of other community choice agencies in operation now. In fact, there are over 1 million customer accounts now served by Community Choice Energy. Pretty much every county in the Bay Area is now either operating a community choice agency or will be shortly. San Jose, you may have heard, as a city just 2 weeks ago, maybe it was last week, approved formation of a CCE, so they were one of the final holdouts. Like I say, you should have received, if you're in the July enrollment, an enrollment card that looks like this. You'll be getting more of these. You are automatically enrolled in a community choice energy program unless you opt out. So there isn't anything you need to do to become part of this. If you don't think this is for you, you can go online or make a simple phone call and opt out. You receive 2 notices prior to enrollment and 2 notices after enrollment. That's by state law. You have 2 electricity choices. Green Start is our standard product. It is 100% carbon free. We're the first community choice agency to make that a standard offer. It's priced at 1% below PG&E's standard generation rate, so you save a little money too. You can opt up and get 100% renewable electricity, 100% renewable and 100% carbon-free, and that'll cost an additional 0.8 of a cent per kilowatt hour. So it's maybe a medium-sized latte once a month to opt up to Green Prime. One bill, as I mentioned, as before, generation line items will reference SVCE, but the bill still comes from PG&E. This went Star Trek on me for some reason, the font there, and this is a small commercial bill. A typical residential bill would be about half of this, roughly $100 a month, and you'll save 50, 60 cents with SVCE. 2 enrollment phases, as I mentioned. Some of you went in April. Most of you will be going in July. If you are a solar customer, you're on a slightly different enrollment schedule. You will enroll at or near your annual true-up date. So how many solar customers do we have here? Should have figured, quite a few. So if your true-up dates are later in the year, you'll enroll either in October or in January, and the point is to try to synchronize it with when you would be kind of approaching a natural end to your true-up year. If you want to go sooner, you can go on our website and enroll early. So in summary, Silicon Valley Clean Energy is about clean electricity at competitive rates. By signing up and joining Silicon Valley Clean Energy, you're helping move the needle in an incredibly substantial way in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. GHGs in Sunnyvale and surrounding communities are between 20 and 25% of the greenhouse gas pie. We're providing carbon-free electricity that takes out that quarter of the pie. That's how significant this is. That was the opportunity that the Environmental Commission and the City of Sunnyvale saw in this, and it's really cool to see it all coming into being now. We're a locally governed agency. We're of, by, and for continuing to reduce emissions. We've got another 75% of the pie to go. So there's a lot of opportunity to reduce emissions from transportation and from natural gas used in the built environment, which is a perfect lead into Pierre's presentation, because it's about figuring out how we can get onto clean electricity and off of natural gas. And so these newfangled heat pump water heaters that we're going to hear all about are one good way to do that. So thank you. I'll be around to answer questions. Tara is working with us these days. Where are you, Tara? Okay. And then John Supp over here. So feel free to crowd around any of us and ask us more questions if you have them. Thank you very much.
Quick question. I mean, since there's so many people who have solar, can you provide an example of how people who generate power and perhaps offset most of the power that they use, how this changeover will affect that?
Do I have time for questions? 30 seconds, okay. So if you generate more electricity than you use in a year, SVC will actually pay you more for what you generate than you get from PG&E. You'll be paid a retail rate for what you overgenerate. If you generate less than you use in a year, it winds up being basically the same financially as it would have been with PG&E. You pay a little bit less for the incremental power you still use, but you get credited a little less too. It winds up being basically the same difference. How'd I do? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, before I introduce our main speaker, I am excited to announce that Sunnyvale residents will soon have an opportunity to participate in a new home energy savings program. In partnership with Actera, it's a local nonprofit environmental education group, Sunnyvale will be offering an updated version of Actera's Green at Home program. This is a free program, and it includes an online analysis of your PG&E smart meter data, providing you with a diagnosis of how your home is using energy. And it will email you specific recommendations for your home and bi-monthly progress reports on the savings you achieve. So participants can also contact Actera for personalized consultation, and some free in-home visits will be offered if needed. So the program is going to start towards the end of June, and there is a clipboard that Nupur will be sending around, and you can sign up on it to get more information. All right, and now to tell us what's next after greenhouse gas-free electricity, I'm pleased to introduce our main speaker this evening, Pierre Delforge of the Natural Resources Defense Council. Pierre joined NRDC based in San Francisco in 2010 after spending 20 years in the information technology industry. At NRDC, Pierre works on policies to accelerate the deep decarbonization of buildings, which is necessary to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise. He focuses on energy efficiency of equipment used within buildings, from electronics and to space and water heating solutions. Please welcome Pierre Delforge.
Good evening. Thank you for coming here. It's great to see a full room, and it's an important topic. So I appreciate you taking the opportunity. And thank you. I would like to thank Crystal and her co-conspirators, Steve, I don't know where Steve is, and James, for inviting me and for organizing this, and the city of Sunnyvale for hosting. And I'd like to congratulate you for the launch of the Community Choice Energy, which is still going, but it's an important phase and milestone. So as Crystal said, this is an important step, but it's only one step, and there are other steps, and I'm here to talk with you about some of the next steps that we can take. So tackling the ghosts in your heating closet. So why ghosts? Because as Crystal said, I spent quite a bit of time working in the IT industry, down the road, and actually in Cupertino, in Palo Alto with HP. And part of what I was doing there was to help the company reduce energy use in its product, in computers, in data centers. And when I moved to NRDC, I continued doing the same work, and also look at all the vampire loads that you have in your homes, all the things that plug in all the time, and even when they're not on, they're sucking energy. We did a study not long ago, about a couple of years ago, found that on average, the home in Silicon Valley has about 65 electrical devices plugged in. 40 of them are using more than 1 watt all the time, 24/7. So these are the vampires, and there's some of the things that we're looking at NRDC, see what can we do about those, and how do we try and provide industry incentives to reduce their incentives and policies to reduce their energy consumption. So I'm not here to talk about vampires, but actually to some extent I am, because then a couple of years ago I started to realize that there are some other vampires in your heating closet. There's your gas furnace and your water heater, and there isn't not much being done about them. These are gas vampires. They actually use natural gas, not electricity, but their contribution to greenhouse gases is actually very substantial, and is something that we're actually not doing as much about as we are doing on other areas of energy efficiency. So we started to look into it, and we launched a kind of project to work on this, and it's gathering steam, I would say, and I'd love to getting more and more partners working on it, and hopefully we'll get to a stage where we can significantly reduce these emissions. I'm going to talk about this a bit more, but just for the context. So I think just to start from the beginning, it all starts with our climate problem. At NRDC, and for those who are not familiar with what we do, we are an environmental group working on policy advocacy. So we try and work on policies on a number of environmental issues, and climate and clean energy are one of our highest priorities. So we're looking at what policies do we need to stay below 1.5 degrees warming, which corresponds roughly to 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So we have just over 30 years to reduce emissions by 80%, right? That's below 1990, but basically we've by 2020, we'll be roughly back to where we were in 1990s. And then we need to go another 80% below that. So it's a huge reduction, but it's critical that we do that if we want to avoid the main impacts of climate change. And a very rough framework on how to get there, to decarbonize our whole economy and society, to get to this 80 by 50, so 80% reduction by 2050 goal. Excuse me. There's basically four major steps. The first one is something that we started about 30 years ago in California, and California has been a leader at doing it, is energy efficiency. And that continues to remain probably the cheapest and the cleanest way to reduce emissions. It's energy efficiency in buildings, in cars, in industry. So basically the cleanest kilowatt hour is the one you don't use, right? So it continues to be a key priority. But what we also realize is to get to 80% reduction is not sufficient, right? You can get a lot with energy efficiency, but 80% is, you still need to get your car running or maybe not your car if you want to bike or take public transit, but you still need a lot of transportation and you need to get the economy running, and we still need energy for this. And we can't just do it all with energy efficiency. The second step, which you've taken or you're taking right now to go to 100% zero emissions. But we started in the state roughly about 20 years ago with the solar and wind revolution. Again, California has been in the lead with doing that. We started doing a lot of solar panels on rooftops, solar farms, wind farms, and that's still going on, but we already have a lot of progress going on in that area. The next step, which I think is already happening on vehicles, is to use that clean electricity that we now have to a large extent, and we're going to have more and more as we go forward, to replace fossil fuels. To replace them in our cars, to move from gasoline cars to electric cars, and to replace them in buildings. And that's, I've added it in red because that's what we're going to talk about today. So just to frame, what the topic is compared to the overall framework for decarbonizing the economy. And the last step, so we need to electrify as much as we can, as much as is practical and economical. And so in transportation, in buildings, like in transportation, you can electrify a lot of passenger cars, but some of the heavy-duty transportation is going to be harder to electrify. When you need to drive a truck for thousands of miles, it's going to be harder to electrify that. There's some other, flying, for example, is another example which is going to be harder to electrify. So we realize that we can't electrify everything, and we need to do as much as we can, but for what we can do, we're going to need some decarbonized fuels, and that's biofuels. Biogas is basically fuel that's made from renewable sources, whether biomass or synthetic, so we can also use renewable energy, convert it, use it to create hydrogen, and use hydrogen to store that energy, and so that's another form of biofuel, decarbonized fuel. So, but again, this last step here is limited in terms of how much is available to make this type of biofuel, and in terms of the cost, the affordability of this fuel. Today, just to give you an idea, we are we're going towards 50% renewable electricity in the state by 2030. There's no target, not even 1% renewable gas standard today. So we're far from going to, we're far behind being able to decarbonize gas, although that's something we need to work on. So with that in mind, let me dive in the building decarbonization. So this is the pie chart is from the Air Resource Board in California, the state agency that is responsible for reducing greenhouse gases, and it shows where are the greenhouse gases coming from in the state. So the biggest piece is transportation. It's no surprise. Industry is pretty big too, but then you have two wedges that are interesting. So electricity in green, both dark green is from in-state power plants and light green is from out of state, so electricity we import from other states. So in-state power plants, so basically all the power plants in California are responsible for about 11% of greenhouse gases in California. And if you add up residential and commercial emissions, so these are the emissions from natural gas and propane, but most of it is natural gas, burnt in buildings, together, that's more than all the power plants in California, or roughly the same. So this just shows that we have a lot of focus. We do a lot of work to try and get clean energy and clean electricity, and that's really critical, and we need to continue doing that. But it's just as important to decarbonize the use of gas in buildings. It's roughly the same order of magnitude, and it's not reducing as fast because we have a lot of policies to shrink these wedges, the green wedges, further, but we don't have a lot of policies to shrink these blue wedges at the moment. So, and if we don't do anything, this 12% by 2050 will be more than the majority of our emissions. So that's why we need to get going, and it's not a quick fix. It's going to take decades to do this. So we need to get started now if we want to have a chance to hit our objectives by 2050. So this is looking at similar things, but from a building perspective, from individual buildings. So your house, for example. And if your house was somewhere, the average house in the US, it would be using most of it. In red, you have emissions from electricity, and in blue, from natural gas. So in the US, on average, most of the emissions come from electricity for two reasons. First, the electricity on average is much dirtier on average in the US than it is in California. Still a lot of coal plants out there. And second, because they use a lot more electricity than we do, they're less efficient, and they use a lot more electric resistance heating, whereas here we have a lot of gas water heating and space heating, right? So that's the US picture, and that's why there's still a perception at the national level that electricity is the biggest issue. And that was the case in California too 20 or 30 years ago, and that's why there's still a perception that natural gas is the clean fuel and electricity is where we have most of our emissions. But things have changed, and there's been a lot of progress. We've made a lot of progress in electricity, and we're continuing to make it. In California, on average, about half of the emissions today are coming from natural gas and half from electricity. And in the Bay Area, on average, 2/3 are coming from natural gas and 1/3 from electricity. So as Don, I think, said early on, if you replace, if you either put solar panels on your roof or you get 100% clean electricity from the community choice energy provider, you're addressing 1/3 of the emissions of your building. And there's still this 2/3 that remains, and that comes from mostly from your gas furnace and your gas water heater. A little bit from cooking, and you don't have to stop cooking with gas, although you can. There's some great alternatives, but this cooking that we'll see in a minute is a small share of gas emissions, so it's really focused on space and water heating. So here we are. So this is the use of natural gas in California. Against the average of California, it changes depending on, it might be a little bit different here, but fundamentally, roughly it's about half water heating, a big third, nearly 40%, space heating, and then cooking you see 7%, right? So the two big ones are space and water heating. And the good news is we now have technology. It's called heat pump, and I'm going to explain what it is. It's not a very sexy name, but it's actually a really cool technology. And this technology can electrify and address most of these emissions, actually 90% of these emissions. So the first one is called a heat pump water heater. So it's very similar. It looks very similar to the water heater you probably have in your house, except that it uses heat pump, electric heat pump technology, no gas. Then you can have heat pump space heating, which replaces your furnace and again uses electricity and provides heat using electricity and heat pump technology. And the last one is a heat pump clothes dryer. So clothes dryers today, some of them, I don't know, you may have a gas clothes dryer, you may have an electric clothes dryer. The chances, even if you do an electric clothes dryer, it's probably an electric resistance, so not very efficient. Whereas now, and it's very recent, started about a year ago, it came to the market about a year ago, you have heat pump clothes dryer, which are about 3 or 4 times, use only about a third or a quarter of the energy of a standard electric clothes dryer. So these are the 3 major technologies using heat pump technology. Okay, going backwards. All right, so what's a heat pump? So let me maybe start by asking, who's got a heat pump in their home today? Okay, maybe 10, not even 10, I think. Right, so everybody's got a heat pump in their home. Your fridge is a heat pump, right? The AC in your car is a heat pump. It's not in your home, but it's your car. So basically, heat pump is not a magic technology. It's just something that moves heat from one place in your fridge, moves the heat from inside the fridge, and pumps it outside of the fridge. Well, for a water heater, it does exactly the same thing in reverse. It moves the heat from outside the water heater into the water heater. It concentrates the heat into the water heater until it reaches the temperature that you need. right? And that uses a similar process as a fridge or an air conditioner. The AC you may or may not have in your house. You don't necessarily need it that much, but in the valley. But if you have an air conditioner, it uses the same process. It takes heat from the home and puts it outside of the home, and the space heating heat pump takes heat outside of the home and moves it into the home, right? So it's AC in reverse. So, okay, fridge or AC in reverse. So the principle, so the diagram is a little bit complex, but basically what it does is just a refrigerant, which is a fluid which absorbs heat, which can be compressed and expanded and basically releases heat in one place and absorbs it in another place and just moves around in the loop. With a compressor, most of the energy goes into the compressor, so that's a blue arrow on the picture. For 1 kilowatt hour of electricity you put in the compressor, you can move between 3 and 4 kilowatt hours of heat from one place to another. So basically you have an efficiency of roughly, depending on the operating conditions, between 250 and 400%, right? So how can you have more than 100% efficiency, right? There's no magic involved. It just means that instead of creating heat or converting heat from burning gas or through electricity, in running electricity through a wire, which is basically what electric resistance is, you're using electricity in a much smarter way. You're using electricity to move heat from one place to another. Right? And that process is 300 to 400% efficient. And that's why heat pump is actually so important, because we have a super high efficiency process. If you power it with clean energy, you can reduce emissions dramatically. Right? And here's a picture of what a heat pump water heater is. Basically, you have a tank, just like a normal water heater. On top of it, you have a heat pump, which basically sucks in ambient air, captures the heat in that air, even if it's cold, even if it's maybe 30 degrees in your garage. Most of these are installed in garages in California. Even if it's cold in your garage, there's always heat in the air, and even when it's really cold. So it captures that heat in the air and it exhausts the cooler air on the other side, right? So that's how a heat pump works. So a couple more details on heat pumps. There's two types of heat pumps. The most common type is what we call a hybrid. So just like a hybrid car, a Prius, or other types of hybrids, it's got two modes. One is the heat pump mode, where it works in the highest efficiency mode, and it moves that heat from one place to another. But sometimes when it gets really cold, the heat pump cannot do this work fast enough and to actually provide the hot water you need. Or if your kids come home from college and they start taking hour-long showers, you need the heat pump. You need to boost that heat pump, right? So it has a electric resistance backup, so the old-fashioned wire that you heat by putting electricity through it, and that's less efficient, but at least it provides the boost that you need to make sure you don't run out of hot water, right? So that hybrid switches from one to the other depending on the needs. It stays in heat pump mode most of the time, but sometimes it falls back into that electric resistance mode. And you also have pure heat pumps. So there's not as many. They're kind of new on the market, but they are higher capacity, so they can provide more hot water faster, and they operate at much lower temperatures. So therefore, they don't need a backup, electric resistance backup, and therefore they're more efficient because they never need to go into resistive mode, right? So two modes. This is the most common one. The bottom one is more efficient, but also more expensive. You never get anything for free. So, but just that it exists. Another thing which is important is there's a lot of confusion about different types of heat pump: air source, ground source. So when we talk about geothermal means ground source. It means that, if you can see on the picture, you're getting the heat not from the air but from the ground. You run pipes in the ground, either horizontally or vertically, and you use that to extract the heat from the ground. And that's more efficient, and it's more efficient especially when it's really cold. So either like in the northern states and in the US or in the mountain regions of California, that may be necessary, although it's not always necessary. It's just more efficient. Air source heat pumps have progressed a lot, and now they're able to operate in really cold temperatures up to negative 20 Fahrenheit, so lots of margin in California. But just know that geothermal heat pumps are more efficient, but they're also a lot more expensive. I think you're talking, depending on the models, 3 or 4 times the price, right? Whereas air source heat pumps are efficient. They do reduce in efficiency as the weather gets colder, but not that much. And in California, they're good enough in almost all cases. So here's some. There's a lot of models in the market, over 100 different types, brands, models. The four on the left, the first four here are hybrids, and the one on the right is a pure heat pump. You can see it's got a little bit different form factor. It's got a little compressor which is separate from the tank instead of having it integrated in the tank. But basically, these are kind of common models, work really well, been on the market for over 10 years now, and they've got really reliable and high performance today. Space heating is a little bit more different. It's a little bit different. There's different types. One is central heat pumps. It's like your gas furnace. You still use the ducts, but instead of having the furnace itself, you put a heat pump that basically uses the ducts. So you have two units. You have one outside. I don't know if you can see the picture's a little bit small, but on the left picture, you have the left circle. It's on the side of the house. You have that little compressor unit that basically absorbs the heat, and it moves it into that the middle of the house where you have that blower unit that uses the ducts, right? So it's called a central heat pump. For smaller houses or houses that don't have ducts, you have ductless heat pumps, also called mini splits. Not very meaningful, but no, that's what the industry uses. And these mini splits basically also have an external unit, but they don't have ducts. Basically, they can move heat directly to each of the rooms, right? So if you don't have ducts in the house, you may want to consider, because instead of having to pay for new ducts, you have your wall furnace, for example, today. It might make sense to move to a ductless heat pump instead of having to install new ducts and a central heat pump. And for, you're probably familiar with the packaged terminal heat pumps. So these are for studios or maybe 2-room apartments, hotel rooms. You know these units. So they're basically through the wall. And they're basically a heat pump that does both heating and cooling. All these heat pumps, by the way, do both heating and cooling. They replace your AC, right? So if you haven't got AC, you're planning to install it, or if you have AC, you need to replace it, just put a heat pump in instead. It's roughly the same cost. Might cost $500 more, but not very much. And you get heating for free. I mean, not for free, because you have to pay for electricity, but you don't have to pay for a heat pump. You already have it in your AC, right? So that's a good opportunity. But it's important to understand that both the heat pumps do both heating and cooling. It's basically the same process reversed in one way or another, right? Okay, so that's space heating heat pumps. So we've talked a lot about single family. I think it's important, even though most of us here are thinking about our own homes. There's a lot of, in the States, 50% of new construction is multifamily. And so it's very important to think about that in terms of efficiency opportunities. I haven't put a picture of those, but there's also trailer parks, manufactured housing, which is also important, and we have quite a few around. And there's commercial buildings. Like the picture on the right is that of a rooftop unit on a big box store. Actually, I think this is an airport in this case. And they're replacing it, so the big unit, which is like container size, they're replacing it by a heat pump, which is a little unit on the left. Right? And that's going to save roughly 80% of the emissions. Right? Replacing a gas rooftop unit that's really inefficient by a heat pump unit and a heat recovery ventilator. So basically, without going into detail, there are solutions for commercial spaces, which you have quite a bit here too. So I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I want to make you to be aware that it's not just about single-family homes. It's about multifamily, and it's about commercial. There's a lot of opportunities in all these spaces. And in multifamily, you don't have to have this single heat pump, which I showed early on. You can also have central heat pumps, where you have one heat pump which is shared by 4, 8, or even more units. And that's more cost-effective to do. Okay, so how about solar thermal? I get this question all the time. So, how does a heat pump compare with solar thermal? So solar thermal, you're just collecting hot water directly from the roof, and you're moving it into the tank. So the answer is, from a greenhouse gas perspective, today with about 50% or 40% renewable, it's roughly the same thing. Because even with solar thermal, you still need a backup. In the winter, typically solar thermal doesn't provide all the hot water you need, so you need to have another backup water heater, which typically produces about 30 to 40% of your needs. And when you account for the emissions from that, so the energy used from that backup, it ends up being roughly similar to a heat pump powered by electricity, which is half renewables. If you have 100% renewable electricity, then your solar thermal heater is higher emissions, of course. And it's also much more expensive. It's about twice the price, right? So I'm not against it. I think, if you want to do solar thermal, I think it's a good solution. But just be aware that it's not necessarily better, and it's also more expensive than doing a heat pump and the PV to power the heat pump together. So basically, a heat pump is solar thermal using electricity. It's the same thing, using electricity from the sun and using that electricity from the sun to heat water in a very efficient manner. And, I think that there's probably a space for solar thermal to be part of the long-term solution, but in order to be a big part of the solution, it's going to have to come down in cost significantly. Right as it is now, it's probably going to be only a small part of the solution because heat pump is much more cost-effective and scalable. Okay, so benefits of heat pumps. I've talked about efficiency. I think you've heard that. It's not the only, and I've talked about emissions. I'm going to show you a chart about emissions next. But there's some other benefits. First, you don't have gas, right? I mean, gas, we're used to it, but let's remember that it's not risk-free. I mean, it can leak, it can burn badly and have, NOx, different gases, or even carbon monoxide, which can be very dangerous. And although it doesn't happen very often, there are explosion risks. So nothing like this for electricity, much safer. Bills, we'll talk about bills as well because it's a little bit complicated, but if done in the right conditions, it can reduce your bills. And that's something which is important. And then there's also the grid, and I'll talk about the benefits for the grid. So I think we have to think about the benefits, not just in terms of efficiency and carbon, but what are all the benefits? A lot of people, when you're going to try and tell them about heat pumps, they may care more about safety, comfort, bills, than about emissions, grid, or carbon, or efficiency, right? So we need to figure out what matters to people we're trying to encourage to switch. So let's move to carbon. So this is a little bit complicated, but let me run you through the chart. On the vertical axis, you have emissions for heating water for one home, for example. On the horizontal axis, you have how clean the electricity is. So on the left, it would be when you have no renewables in the grid, 100% gas electricity in the gas-fired power plants to generate the electricity. And then on the right, you have 100% clean electricity, right? Even when you have no renewables on the grid, the heat pump in green is cleaner, lower carbon than the best gas tankless condensing water heater on the market today. Right? So when people say, well, in the evening when there's no solar on the grid, it's not that renewable anymore. Even in the evening during peak time when you have your peaker plants on to provide electricity and keep the lights on, you're still having lower emissions by using a heat pump water heater than natural gas. And if you heat it in the middle of the day when there's a lot of solar on the grid, you get virtually emissions-free water heating. And as long as you don't go into electric resistance mode, because that's the black line. If you go in electric resistance mode and during peak time, like 6 p.m., and for some reason using a lot of hot water, it goes into electric resistance mode, you're going to be higher than gas. So that's the caveat to this. Heat pumps work great if you run them efficiently and you avoid them going to electric resistance mode at peak. And I'm talking about this even if I know that SVC you have the ability to have 100% carbon-free electricity, but let's remember that that's from a net perspective. And even if you have 100% carbon-free electricity, at some point you're still going to have to import electricity from gas plants because you're putting a lot. If you buy a lot of solar resources, you're putting a lot of solar back into the grid during the middle of the day. But to keep the lights on at night and in the evening, you're still going to have to use some power plants. And so that's why I'm showing the peak on the left and off-peak on the right. The more you use electricity off-peak, the cleaner it is. The more you use it on-peak, the less clean it is. That make sense? Okay, so the takeaway from this chart is heat pump water heaters provide a pathway to virtually carbon-free or very, very low carbon water heating, which gas doesn't. So if there's one thing to remember, natural gas, even if it's highly efficient, if it's tankless, for a lot of time people have told us tankless is the way to go, it's efficient and everything. Yeah, it's a little bit more efficient than the tank gas. You can see a blue and orange line, so you're getting better, but it's still a lot higher emissions than a heat pump water heater would be. Okay, next, grid benefits. So this is the duck curve. I don't know if you've all seen this or what this chart means. No, it's pretty famous. But what it means, this is how much electricity is used in the state, and but it's net demand. So basically, you reduce from the demand, you reduce how much is produced by renewables. So in the middle of the day, that's where you have the belly of the duck. You see the belly of the duck and then the neck and the head of the duck. So the belly of the duck is in the middle of the day when you have a lot of solar on the grid, right? And you have so much solar that you need less and less electricity from gas power plants, right? And the more and that causes some issues because at some time, I mean, especially this year, this spring, with a lot of hydro, because we had a lot of water, a lot of rain, we have the reservoirs are full. There's a lot of hydroelectricity, and at some point, sometimes during the day, we have to actually curtail solar electricity on the grid, right? So it hurts because we're working so hard to get more electricity, more solar on the grid, and sometimes we just can't use it. We don't have enough demand for it, right? And even when we can use it, the prices go really, really low. So for investors who want to invest in solar, and they think they're going to have a good return on it, and it ends up that they don't have a good return on it in the middle of the day because there's too much of it, then it's a disincentive to continue investing and to continue ramping up our renewables. So the good news is heat pump water heaters can be part of the solution, not the only part, but what they can do, they can run during the middle of the day, heat up that water during the middle of the day, keep it warm so that you can use it in the evening and throughout the night in the morning, and not kick in during those times. So it's basically a battery, a thermal battery. It charges during the middle of the day when you have a lot of carbon-free and cheap and plentiful electricity, and then it holds that. It's like a battery. You can use it when you need it, and the electricity is not as cheap and as clean. Yes.
I've never seen this before, but so if I understand this correctly, at the bottom or the belly of the duct, you're saying that we're generating so much energy as a community because people have solar and there's hydroelectric, and that we and then there's this huge steep ramp at night.
Right. Well, so when solar goes down, end of afternoon, early evening, yes.
So why don't we? I mean, as an idea, why don't we use all that excess energy at the belly and pump water back to the top of dams?
We do already, but that's not sufficient. I mean, just the capacity of doing that. That's part of the storage that we use today, right? But it's just we don't have enough dams to meet this. 13,000 megawatt hours. That's too much.
Battery technology is not up to the task yet.
So I'm going to talk about this in a minute. But this is one type of battery technology. It's a lot cheaper than some chemical batteries, but it's one type of battery. So we need a lot of storage. At the moment, we have a shortage of storage. We need to smooth exactly.
Huge capacity.
Yes, and heat pump water is a part of that solution. So that's I've got another slide later on. Actually, I think the next one. So, yes.
Where you talk about the strategy of like running that water heater there, like I've got solar now.
Yes.
And I've got an electric car too. So
Yes.
I basically sell to the grid in the afternoon and buy back from the grid at night. Great. So I've tried to optimize my lifestyle to consume as much as possible at night. And you're saying with this water heater, I should be doing just the opposite.
Yeah, and with your car, you should also be doing the opposite in the sense, if your car is available and for charging in the middle of the day, do so because you're actually using your electricity instead of sending it back to the grid. So basically, at the moment, we still have net energy metering, which is what allows you to send electricity back to the grid as if it's a battery, but it's not a battery. The grid isn't a battery. It's just it has to be used somewhere. So at the moment, we're getting a really good deal. Just because it's still early days, and it's kind of an incentive for solar, that we're getting a good deal that we can export electricity and re-import it later on as if it's a free battery. But it's not free and it's not a battery. So basically, somewhere these electrons have to be used by something, and at a time when there isn't a lot of demand. So basically, we're exporting electricity at a time when there isn't a lot of demand, and we're importing it back when there is a lot of demand. And that works when there isn't a lot of solar on the grid, but as we get more and more solar on the grid, that won't work anymore. So we can expect that net energy metering is going to evolve to make it less advantageous to and not allow you to do as much. Basically, you're going to get less favorable terms for doing that. And using as much as you can of your energy in the middle of the day when you're producing energy is actually the most cost-effective thing for you, and it's the best thing for the grid. It is the best. It is the most cost-effective thing.
I sell it to the grid and I buy it back at 1/4 what I sold it for.
Right. But you're not. Well, that's because the time of use tariff is not, it's lagging, but that will change. That will change. That's coming. So that's at the moment you're getting a good deal, but the good deals don't last forever. So just wait. I need to move on, right? Can I just have to hold questions? Otherwise, I may not get to the end of the presentation in time. I know Crystal is going to tell me off. So, all right. So this is the duck curve from the grid perspective. Now let's look at it from my own home perspective, my own duck curve, and I bet many of you, have the same issue. So in orange, I have my solar production on one typical day. So a little bit of, in the morning was a little bit maybe overcast. I live in Berkeley, so it's a lot of fog around there in the morning. And in blue, I have my consumption. So I started using electricity. That was in March, so it was dark in the morning, and then probably went to work. Didn't use it much during the day, and then we got home and started to use a lot more in the evening, but the sun was down, so it wasn't generating anymore, right? So basically, if you look at it from import-export perspective, I import in the morning, I export a lot during the day, I import again in the evening, right? And in numbers, I export actually 87% of my production that day, and I still imported, so in nearly 90%, I still imported 2/3 of what I used, right? So I have a lot more electricity, but I don't use it at the right time. And that doesn't work if everybody does this, right? At the moment, we have enough users at other times that it still works. Not everybody has solar, but if everybody has solar and we have 100% renewables everywhere in California, that won't work. So we need to better align demand with generation. And that's how we're going to be able to get to towards 100% solar or 100% renewables. Okay, I've talked about curtailment and low prices, so that's caused by the imbalance between demand and supply. And as you were saying before, load shaping, so shaping that load to better match, shaping the demand to better match supply is basically what we need to do to be able to help get to really high, penetration of renewables. And there's two ways of doing this. There's the batteries like Tesla Powerwall, and there's heat pump water heaters, right? So heat pump water heater, you have a water heater in your home anyway. If it's a heat pump water heater, you just add about maybe a couple $100 of controls to it, or sometimes less. And here you have a battery that has similar level of capacity as a Tesla Powerwall. We're talking about 3 to 5 kilowatt hours of energy. So for $200, I'm not saying it's better, I'm saying it's different. This one is only for water heating. You can't use that energy to do other things, whereas the Tesla Powerwall or other batteries are more versatile. But it's a lot cheaper, and we need both. I'm not saying we need just one or the other, but I'm just saying this is a great opportunity to get really cheap energy storage and help move towards high renewables. Okay, so this is fantastic. So what's the problem? Why don't we have heat pump water heaters everywhere today? Market share today about 1%, right? And how do we get from 1% to 80 or 90% by 2050? We have to transform the market, and the reason we're not only at 1% today is the technology exists. It's not a problem of technology. We have a lot of market barriers, obstacles. We have awareness. A lot of people don't understand what it is. And myself, before I started looking into it 3 or 4 years ago, I had heard about them, but I didn't really understand what it was. And when I've changed my furnace, I put a gas furnace in, right? I didn't know better. And there's this perception and great marketing strategy by all the gas companies that natural gas is clean, right? Clean natural gas. Well, it's cleaner than coal, but it's not clean enough. So we need to change that. And there's also kind of, people attached to gas cooking. Induction cooking is actually better, but, people are still attached to gas cooking and have, maybe the acceptance level of going to. So that doesn't change for gas and water heating, but for going to an all-electric home, which is actually the most cost-effective way of doing, it costed less to build an all-electric home than a gas home, but there's an issue with acceptance in terms of cooking, which is kind of the main barrier for people. There's access issues. If your water heater breaks, you're going to want to have it repaired pretty quickly, right? And how many days can you go without hot water? Most people want same-day replacement, right? Same-day replacement means it has to be on the truck or at the least in the store, and the plumber needs to be able to install the same day, right? Today, most stores don't store heat pump water heaters. There's not enough demand for it, and most plumbers don't have one on the truck. So, we need to make sure that the supply chain is there to be able to provide these products for people if they want them. First thing is to get demand, get the supply chain, the plumbers, the contractors to be able to supply them, to know how to install them, and to recommend them. I mean, today, if you ask a plumber, they don't know about it. They say, "Oh, don't do that. Do my gas water heater. I know how to do this. It's going to be cheaper, and it's not new." Cost. I talk about cost. Cost is not necessarily a negative. In some cases, it's more expensive, but in other cases, it can be cheaper. So we'll talk about this in a minute. Technology is good enough. It's there already. It's still improving very quickly, just like electric cars. Batteries getting high capacity all the time. But today we have really good technology for heat pumps. So I don't think we need to wait for that. This is already we need to have technologies that are more flexible for in terms of installation location, in terms of form factors. But what we have works really great today. And I think maybe the biggest barrier today in California is regulatory. We're still in a state where we, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we were in a situation where electricity, all the emissions came from electricity. Electricity was a dirty fuel, and the state policy was to switch people from electric resistance, powered by coal-fired power plants, to clean natural gas, quote, clean natural gas, right? So all the regulations are still, trying to do that today. And it's like, having a tanker ship. It takes a long time to turn it around, right? You have to change so many things. Everything is accumulated over 20 years or 30 years of policy. So the building code, it favors gas today. It's more difficult. It's possible, but it's more difficult to do all electric or even electric just water heating. Incentive program from utilities. So PG&E doesn't do incentives for fuel switching. It's not that they don't want to do it, because to be honest, I know, and James, you can probably confirm, because he used to work at PG&E. They'd be happy to do it. They'd love to do it. They're not allowed to. CPUC does not allow incentive programs for fuel switching from gas to electric today. Something we're trying to change, but that's current barrier, and it takes time. You have to go through proceeding, and natural gas company obviously is not, is not okay with it, so it's trying to prevent you from doing it. And rates are designed in a way that don't necessarily encourage heat pump water heaters. So you have rates for electric vehicles today that make it more easier to charge at night and make it convenient and affordable to charge an electric vehicle. We don't have that for heat pumps. For heat pumps, you don't want to charge at night. You want to charge during the day when there's a lot of solar. And you don't have a rate today that makes it really cheap to charge during the day and more expensive to use it at night. So that's something that, again, it takes work to do. So we're working on all of these things. It's going to take a little while, but even without it today, there are opportunities to switch already. So I want to address a little bit the cost question. Excuse me. So here's, actually, I replaced my water heater a couple of months ago, and I had an old gas water heater, 26 years old, and said, most replacements are emergency replacement. 90% of replacement water heaters are emergency replacement today. And when you work in an emergency replacement situation, you don't have time. You have to get it done within 12, 24 hours, or no, probably not much more than that. But if heat pump water heater, if you do a planned replacement, if you know your heat pump water your water heater is getting towards the end of its life, it's more than 10 to 15 years old, I think it's time to start looking and start. And if you have time, if you can, it took me 6 weeks to replace mine. I have to do the research and get bids from contractors, and then decide that I was better off buying it myself rather than get the contractor buy it and mark it up. And so I got, basically I ended up buying it, arranging the electrician, arranging the plumber, and it took 6 weeks. But it's great. It works fine. It wasn't actually that expensive. But so cost, upfront cost, and that's just retrofit. New construction is very different, because in new construction you have all the trades in the building already, so it does actually cost more to do it. But in a retrofit, when you have already it installed somewhere, you need to switch from gas to electricity, there's a little bit more higher cost. So cost, equipment for gas is about $500, installation between $700 and $1,000. So you ended up with between $1,200 and $1,500 to replace a gas water heater. Heat pump, equipment is more, it's between $1,000 and $1,500. if you need an electrical 240 volt to operate it, and typically you don't have that where you have a gas water heater because they don't need 240 volts. So you have to get an electrician to install that conduit from the panel to the garage, which typically we install those in garage in California, and that costs anywhere between $300 and $700, and then you have installation, which is a little bit more expensive as well. All in all, it's about $2,200 to $3,700, and so that's just upfront cost. It's going to cost less to operate, and we can recoup that upfront cost in most cases on utility bills. But it means that you have to be ready to invest in, to pay more upfront, just like buy the electric cars, it costs more upfront. If you can have rebates, I'm going here. So to get to near parity in upfront costs, which is critical if we want to scale the market, we need today about $1,500 rebate. That's what Palo Alto offers, that's what SMUD in Sacramento offers. And that's the type of rebate that's necessary to move, to go beyond the early adopters. Early adopters are going to be ready to pay a little bit more, and they understand, they're sophisticated, they understand that they're going to get the money back. But for most people, they're going to look at cheapest first cost, right? So today we still need rebates to move the market. So now, how to make it work? So I mentioned early on, there's situations where today you can make it cost effective. So those situations are, to start with, upfront cost. So new construction, I mentioned that if you build a new home today, it's actually about the same cost for just a heat pump water heater. If you do the home all electric, you're going to save a bunch of money because you don't have to connect that home to the gas line in the street. That costs somewhere between $8,000 to $15,000 to do. So if you can use these $10,000 or $8,000 to $15,000 to invest on the electric side, you can do a lot on your home, right? So that's the most cost-effective way, all electric homes. You can do, you can use rebates when they're available. Hopefully SVC will be able to offer rebates. SVC is not, as long as you don't use ratepayer funds, you're not subject to CPUC. But so you have more flexibility, and that's one of the next steps. You may be able to provide incentives to help people switch. I mentioned earlier on, if you have an AC, if you're installing AC or replacing it, it's a great time to move to a heat pump heating system. And then financing can also help get over that first cost hurdle. So then from an operational cost perspective, so the monthly utility bill from operating, how does it compare between gas and electric? So PG&E rates and probably SVC rates, standard rates, is going to, it may be, so it depends what water heater you use, how efficient it is. But in some cases, if you do a gas tankless, it's going to be lower bills than a heat pump water heater. So heat pump water heater may be higher bill than an efficient gas, but it's going to be cheaper than an inefficient gas. So the gas tank that I showed earlier on, which is kind of a low, the most inefficient gas tank you can buy, that's going to cost more in utility bills than your heat pump water heater. So you can save money, right? From moving from that gas tank to heat pump water heater. But it depends, if you have a gas tankless today, it's going to be about the same. Time of use rates, if you have an EV rate and you use that EV rate to charge the water heater at the right time, you're going to get really good deal there. The best thing is actually rooftop PV. I should have started with that because if you have solar on your roof today, that gives you roughly half the electricity, which is from a total cost, lifetime cost perspective, is about half the cost of your grid electricity today. And if you use that electricity to power a heat pump, you're getting really cheap hot water and space heating. So that's actually that combination of rooftop PV and heat pump is a really cost-effective way of doing it. And then for people, probably not a lot of people here, but there are people who use propane or electric resistance today, and these are so expensive that if you move to a heat pump, you cut your bill in 3 or 4, right? So if you think of it not just in terms of your own, yourself in terms of your own bills, but how do we move this to scale in the community? We need to think about what are the opportunities to make this work today. Until the technology costs come down, until rebates are more available, there are things that we can do today to start moving the market, and these are some of the opportunities. I think I'm nearly done. Yeah, 2 more, I think, slides. So there's one thing, this is from a policy perspective. I'm talking, maybe talking to Sunnyvale policymakers today, or with this slide, is we've developed a proposal. It's still very new. It's still going through the CEC for review. But one possibility to encourage adoption is to have a local ordinance that basically, just like some cities are adopting local ordinances to say every new building, it's just for new buildings or major retrofit. It's not for existing homes, but for new buildings, every new home that's being built needs to have solar. The state is going there by 2020. Some cities like Santa Barbara and others, Fremont just adopted it, required for every new construction today, right? And instead of doing just for solar, you could do it for water heating, right? What it means is that it would require that every new home needs to have what I call renewable hot water, which means either a heat pump water heater with photovoltaic, or a solar thermal with at least 60% solar fraction, which means at least it provides at least 60% of your hot water needs. Or if you don't want any of these options, then you can just do more efficiency. That's kind of a flexibility option, like an off-ramp. If for some reason people don't want to do any of it, we're just trying to provide a lot of flexibility so that it isn't just one option that is mandated, but people have a choice. The heat pump water heater and PV option 1, is the cheapest by far. So we think that if we provide this as a choice, people will be incentivized. They will basically choose that option as the lowest cost option, and that reduces roughly the same amount of greenhouse gases as netting out all the electricity used in your home, right? So you're getting roughly the same bang from your buck in terms of carbon by doing this as you are doing by moving to 100% renewable electricity, right? So something to keep in mind, and actually in terms of benefits, from a homeowner perspective or a bill payer perspective, it reduces because they are pairing with PV, it reduces their water heating bills by 50%. Sorry. So that's just for bills, 50% from bills. If you look at overall costs in terms of the equipment cost, installation cost, and bill cost, it was still cheaper by about 13%. It reduces energy by 30%, energy used by 30%, and CO2 by 50%. Right, so lots of benefits. Something to consider in terms of what can we do from a policy perspective to move forward on this. And I'm happy to talk to afterwards to anybody who's interested in doing this. There's a lot of cities right now. I mean, we are shopping it around with lots of cities, a lot of interest. Berkeley's looking at it. Cities in San Mateo County, Marin County, we're looking at it. Bear End is doing a workshop where they're going to talk about this and others later in June. So, this is new, but a lot of interest about this. So, takes me to my last slide, just a conclusion slide. We have a huge challenge. We have a technology that exists but only has about a 1% market share. To meet our climate goals, we need to move to, close to 100%, at least 80 or 90% market share. We have 30 years to do it, but these things, when you install one in a building, it's going to last 15, 20 years. So we don't have that many replacements ahead of us to be able to move. And if you build a new home today and you build it for gas, it costs money to change it, to switch it to electricity later on. So because we're talking about things that have a long life, buildings and space heating and water heating, we don't have that much time to get it right, to get it to 80% or 90% penetration by 2050. We need to get started. The next few years are going to be critical in getting started, going from 1% to 5% market share, 10%, and getting the market going, build capacity in the market. When you get to 1% market share, things cost a lot. You don't have volume. Manufacturers don't have enough volume to invest making things cheaper. So it's still kind of early days, early adopter prices. But to get to much lower cost, we need to get to 5 or 10% market share. So how do we do that in the next few years? And it's going to take a lot of actors together. Homeowners, if you are a pioneer or an early adopter, consider it. If you have one, talk about it. Have an open house. Talk to your friends and show it off and say how it works for you. Building professionals need to be trained. They need to become champions and talk to their customers about it. That's why Palo Alto last week had a workshop to actually train the contractors and plumbers and distributors. The city and the county can do things like ordinances, just mentioned, outreach, events like this one to educate people, get the word out. Air District is getting in the game as well and trying to help cities promote local ordinances and provide incentives. And most of the work is still at the state, though, where, as I mentioned earlier on, a lot of policies need to be changed to pave the way to make this a scalable solution. So let me stop here and open it up for questions. I went a little bit over. Apologies. Thank you. One here, and then next Jane, and then third one.
Say you submitted to the CPC for option one. Was that for a cost effectiveness study?
Sorry, could we have mics at either end?
Yeah, I can repeat the question. So the question is whether we submitted to CEC and what is it submitted for. So we actually submitted the whole package is 3 options, where you have a choice between 3 options. That's the proposal we submitted. Cities don't have to adopt all 3. They can adopt 2, can adopt something different. But yes, we're doing a cost-effectiveness study because to adopt a local ordinance, you have to prove it's cost-effective, compliant, and doesn't break preemption. So technical, but so the cost-effectiveness study is being reviewed right now. So it hasn't been published yet, but it's very close to being published. I mean, I'd say a week max or 2 weeks. And then it can be used by the city. Say, if you adopt the proposal as is, you can say, okay, here's a cost-effectiveness study, and it's compliant, and it's basically it's easy to adopt. If you want to change it, then you have to address the cost-effectiveness study. When it's published, definitely. At the moment, the proposal that's on the docket at CEC is the kind of conceptual proposal, what I propose with some more detail, but the cost-effectiveness study is still in the works. Jane.
Well, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
My question is, my brother is building a house in Michigan from the ground up and wanting to be more environmentally good. And he claims that when he asks his designer and architect and whoever else about a heat pump, that they're saying to him, in our temperature, when there's substantial numbers of days that are below 32 degrees, it's not at all cost effective. And I'm just wondering if the technology is working on such a thing, and until then, could he have it for part of the time when it's not below 32 degrees?
Absolutely. For northern climate, there's something called cold climate heat pumps that are designed specifically to go much lower in temperature, and they do work in cold climates. And so, yes, it's feasible. It can be designed in a way that you can have a supplemental source of heat if you want not to. You can either oversize your heat pump, size it for maximum needs, the coldest day, but you can also size it for 80% of your winter needs, and then have some backup electric resistance baseboard or something like that, just to provide complementary needs. So there's a number of ways of doing it. A lot of states, most active states are in Northeast, Vermont, Maine. These are really cold states in the winter, and they're doing a lot of heat pumps.
What's the maximum temperature of heat pump or heat water station?
Sorry, just I get to that question, but first, they do ground source and air source, cold climate air source. So both work, but ground source is more efficient. It's also more expensive, but yeah. Question is, sorry, can I just take that question and
Sure.
I'll get to you next. What's the maximum temperature a heat pump can go to? That depends on the heat pump. Typically, for most heat pumps, it's about 160, and some heat pumps go to 190.
First, a public announcement. If you have a question, come to the microphone so that the people on the recording can actually hear what your question is. Otherwise, they have a lot of silence. They have no idea what your question is. So line up at the mic if you have a question. Okay, my question is about heat pumps and water heaters. Are there any integrated models so that, like when I need air conditioning during the summer, I can use that heat that is cooling my house to heat my water? And that way I only have one installation rather than having to have 2 separate things. Also, in my house, putting a heat pump hot water heater in the closet my hot water heater's in, I need to re-engineer my house because I can't put one of those hot water heaters there because it doesn't have enough heat inside the closet to power the hot water pump apparently, the heat.
Okay, so two good questions. So first one, remind me, is it the
Iteration.
recovery? So
Yeah.
yes. So what basically you're saying, if I cool my home, can I basically extract heat from my home? Can I reuse that heat to heat water? You can do this at commercial scale. They don't do it in a very small model. It would be too expensive. But it's actually a technology that exists for larger models where it's actually it's cost effective to do so. I haven't seen it in small models for home size. Second question is, what do I do if my water heater is in a closet inside my home? Two things: either you move it to the garage, which is the best location for a water heater in California, or even in a vented closet outdoors. You have can be in a outdoor closet which is just protected from the elements, but is basically have access to outdoor air. So that's another way to install them in California. You can also leave it inside if you want. In that case, the best thing is to duct it. So they're ductable, so you can duct the intake and the exhaust of air to the attic, for example. Excuse me. So basically, if your attic air is warm most of the time, you can actually get a lot of heat from that air, but it's a little bit more expensive to duct it. Basically, you have to add to installation costs for ducts.
Thank you. Come to the mic, please.
I'm just wondering if there's a list of contractors available to install.
List of contracts available to install. Crystal, is that list can be shared or?
So there is a resource list of different manufacturers and websites that you can go to. We weren't able to put the list of contractors because that would maybe consider an endorsement, which the city couldn't do that at this time. But
is that something that Sunnyvale Cool could do? I mean, as a non-profit, post a list of contractors? Possibly. So, suggestions here.
In terms of the power for the panel for the house, because like my frame of reference, I've got a legacy house with a 100-amp panel, and even just to charge the car involved a moderate amount of finesse and reuse of things that were already there. Yep. So where you've got a lot of housing stock in this region now that is legacy with 100-amp panels, can you talk about how this works in that, or maybe give guidance on what kind of amperage levels should we be requesting for panels if we want to go the heat pump route?
Yeah, that's an important question, and that's one of the most difficult, challenging cases. Is added a lot of significant cost to upgrade a panel. I mean, you have to do it for whatever you electrify. I mean, charging your car on 100 amps. I'm actually surprised you can do that, but it's probably tight. I mean, typically 200 amps is sufficient to run an all-electric house.
Well, and at least my situation, I've got buried utility where I live, and it was going to be cost prohibitive to bring in a higher current feed.
Yeah.
So it was, and again, I think probably a lot of this area's got buried utility too. So.
So there are some heat pumps which only require 15 amps, and so you don't need just a standard breaker would do. And these, so they're a little bit more expensive, but you don't have to upgrade your panel. So there's two models, T-Ball Eltron and Sandon, work on 15 amps.
Yeah. Well, you might want to, in the slides here, put a reference like suggested amperage level going this route, so people have some understanding of how this should be designed.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Back onto that, there are car charging stations that can reduce the load if there are other consumers, big consumers running, so you can do load balancing inside your home.
Okay. Crystal, sorry. Yes.
Well, first, thank you for starting the lecture series with such a fantastic presentation and such a great way. I have a couple of questions. Would you talk a little bit about how fast a heat pump water heater heats water to temperature sufficient for use? Also, I'm thinking one of the deficiencies in both gas and in tank water heaters is that we heat water and sometimes we don't use it, and we maintain the temperature over time. By that, we are not efficient. So would you compare the heat pump water heater with instant heater?
Yes, so how fast does it heat water? It's slower than a gas or even resistance water heater. But so basically the tank is a big buffer, right? 50 gallon or more. And if you size your tank properly, and actually it's a good point that you asked this because heat pumps work a little bit slower than conventional water heaters, it's better to upsize them a little bit. So I think a 50 gallon will still be sufficient for a 2 or 3 people family. But if you're 4 or more, you might want to go to 65 or 80 gallon instead. Although you might have used a 50 gallon until now, you probably want a little bit more capacity because it's going to take a little bit longer to get back up to temperature, right? But they also have the hybrid mode. So if you need a lot of hot water quickly, you have a lot of people in your home, your kids come back from college or family coming to visit holidays, then it's going to switch to hybrid mode automatically. When it's basically running out of hot water, it's not providing fast enough, it automatically switches to hybrid mode. So in that case, it can provide both the speed at a lower efficiency or slower hot water at a higher efficiency. And in terms of the losses by heating water and letting it sit, tanks are really well insulated these days. I mean, the federal standards, federal appliance standards by the Department of Energy have forced manufacturers to insulate their tanks pretty well. So the thermal, the losses of heat when you don't use the water, I mean, they're never zero, but they're much lower than they used to be. And although, it is more efficient to have tankless, but the efficiency of a heat pump is so much higher that, that's the chart I showed early on in my, this one. The heat pump, the gain in efficiency from the heat pump is much bigger than the gain of efficiency from going to tankless.
Thank you.
Okay, James.
So I've had a heat pump water heater in my garage for the last 3 years, and it's been just great. Now there's only 2 of us in our household, but I also have it set. It's a hybrid model, but you can actually set them to be heat pump only. So I tell it not to do the electric resistance, and I have mine set all the way down to 114 degrees, which just barely covers my shower and my wife's shower. So there's a lot of additional heating room if you could set it higher. So I've sort of tested the lower end of it. So there's a lot of capability for 2 or 3 people with my 50-gallon heat pump in just heat pump only mode. I also, because I have an EV, I'm on the EV rate. It's a time of use rate. So, as another gentleman was saying earlier, that given the time frames of peak and off-peak costs for time of use rates as they are now, you of course want to use the electricity when it's less expensive. But in 2019, there'll be a lot of changes to more people will be on time of use rates, and the proposals are to shift those times to match the duck curve as you showed before. So as you said, there are some changes coming. So matching with the time of use to be able to do that is a great way to save additional money, not only with an EV, but also your heat pump. So I've had a good experience with a heat pump water heater and can recommend it and be happy to talk with anybody about it. Thanks.
Thank you, James. And just to build on, I think you're making some good points. The heat pump water heaters come with different modes, so you can put them in eco mode, where they're going to try and minimize electric resistance use. You can put them in heat pump only mode, like James does, where they're never going to use electric resistance if you really want to make sure it never goes into inefficient mode. Or you can put them in high demand mode, when you have family at home, a lot of people, and you need more hot water. Or you can put them in vacation mode, if you're going to be gone for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you just let the water go down all the way down to 70 or 60 and until you get back. So it's very flexible. So question here, and then I'll move alternate between the 2 sides.
Hi. Are there water heaters, heat pump water heaters that have a line to an outside heat exchanger? Or are we talking about interior models only?
Yes, there's one. Where is that slide? There's only one today, although I think there are going to be more. No, I think it's before that. The one on the right. This one's got an external heat exchanger. But there will be more coming on the market.
For the rest of them, it's important to have them within the building envelope, right?
Not
That you don't want them in a garage, for instance, an unheated garage.
No, you do want them outside of the building envelope so that you don't scavenge the heat from that conditioned space.
You mean if it's extremely well insulated?
No, it's just basically you need to capture, the heat pump water heater captures heat.
Oh.
And if you capture it from your conditioned space, then you have to heat that space more. So it's interactive effect between space and water heating. It's not a big deal. It doesn't negate the benefits, but it reduces the benefits.
But you have to be careful you're not losing the heat from the storage to the environment also.
The storage loss is actually not that significant. I mean, if you use a decent amount of hot water, they're a fairly small portion of the losses.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess I'm a little surprised that we're just talking about gas water heaters here, because I possibly erroneously have always thought that gas water heaters use a lot less gas than a forced air furnace over a year. But I think one of your slides said that wasn't true. Can you correct that?
Yeah, so it depends where. The slide I showed is the average for all of California. In Southern California, they use a lot less space heat. It's milder climate, so it's mostly water heating. And also it depends. So I think in this area, you use more heat for space heating. You're right, in this area.
Do you know roughly what the comparable numbers are?
It depends on no, I don't know the average. It depends on the home and the size of the family. And I would say it's probably 60-40 or something like that. The reason I talk more about heat pump water heaters and space heating is because it's the easiest thing to do. It's cheaper. Yeah. Space heating. You're talking about at least 5,000, maybe more. 10,000, depending on the size of your home and the configuration. Just like gas furnace with ducts is more expensive than a gas water heater. So it's the easiest. It's the first entry point, I would say. But space heating, if you have the opportunity, is also very important, and I encourage you to look at it.
Okay, good answer. Thank you.
So interesting segue into this gentleman's question. You start off by talking about the types of heat pumps for space heating, for water heating, and for clothes dryers. Mm-hmm. And you've focused 90% on hot water heating.
Yes.
And you also mentioned that it does both heating and cooling. So I wanted to just get clear in my mind, if we're talking about water heating and also space heating, are these two separate pieces of equipment, or since you said they do double duty, is if you wanted to get new water heating and space heating, you would have one unit that does both? I'm not quite clear on this.
Yeah. So today they're separate pieces of equipment in most of the cases. They are combined space and water heaters, but they're not really on the market in California yet. They're being introduced, and there's very early days, but you can do custom systems that do that. Actually, I'm working on one of them for my home at the moment. But it's custom, so it's going to be require more engineering costs to design the system so that it works properly. So to do combined space and water heating is still a little bit early. If you're really want an adventure, you can do it, but it's not packaged out of the store.
To add to your answer, underfloor hydronic would combine the two.
Yes, so that's the type of thing you can do, but so without going into too much detail, the water heaters are designed to do water heating with cold water in and hot water out. When you do hydronic, you have warm water coming back from the loop, and it's not the same. You don't get the same efficiency, and you need a lot of controls to make it work. So yes, it works. It can work, and it works in some cases. It's more complicated. It's not standard. So unless you want to do a custom solution with the cost and the work that it requires, I would recommend you wait a few years, and that's coming on the market, and then in a few years' time it will be available. But at the moment, it's easiest to do one system that does water heating well and one system that does space heating well, and keep them separate. It's the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it.
You mentioned hot water heaters that communicated to the utility.
Yes.
I was starting to do research in the heat pump hot water heaters and didn't see any that offered that option.
So in California, there aren't any utility programs that offer this yet. The technology exists. Today, what's available is a control module that the homeowner can control the water heater, schedule it, program it, etc. The utilities are not yet offering programs to do this. That's one of the things I'm working on, is to do a study to show the benefits and to encourage utilities to do that. But it's probably going to become available, and I hope SVCE is one of the pioneers to offer this type of programs. But that's the future, because at the moment, it doesn't quite make sense yet to offer this type of program where you have 1% market share. But it's chicken and egg. As you get more market share, then it will make sense to invest in this type of program. So how do we build the market for it? Okay, maybe you have another part of your question.
Just a part B to my question. So I understand, keep these two units separate for now. So I get that. So you mentioned with heat pump water heaters, technology is about 10 years old. It's fairly mature, even though the contractors won't push it. And in an emergency 12 to 24-hour situation, you're going to get a gas water heater if you're just using a standard contractor. For space heating heat pump technology, is the technology as mature as for water heating? And if I know that I want to replace my furnace in the next, say, 24 months, that's a viable alternative for me. Yes. pretty much today?
Yes, so the answer is, well, first, when I said 10 years for water heating, that's in the US. In Japan and Europe, they've been around for decades. Same thing with space heating. They're used very widely in Japan. It's kind of the default heating solution. So the technology itself is very mature. The only problem is it needs to be installed well. It needs to be sized properly. It needs to be installed properly. So the the experience and the skill set of the installer is critical. So just find an installer who knows how to do this, and I think that's the only thing that you need to. That's the most important thing, I would say.
But there are enough space heating heat pump products on the market.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're about the end of our time. I want to thank Pierre again for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so this, as I mentioned, this is being recorded, and we'll have the event available on the city's website. I believe you can also get the resources page, and it'll have that website. So a week or two. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Oh, good. So if you can make sure you sign in, then you'll get a copy or a link of it. Okay, and then there's also the survey. If you could please fill it out, we'd really appreciate it. And again, there's the clipboard that went around for the Green at Home program. Elaine has it if you want to sign up there. And I want to thank everyone again for coming. The next event, August 2nd, we'll be publicizing that as well for transportation electrification. All right, thank you all.